I still remember the exact moment I realized everything I thought I knew about Meghan Markle was a lie. It wasn't the first time I had noticed little inconsistencies, the tiny flickers of behavior that didn't match the charming, radiant persona the world adored. But it was the moment when the truth hit me in full force, the realization that she had been living a double life, that she had been hiding behind smiles and social media posts while secretly betraying the people closest to her. And yes, I was one of those people. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. I've stayed quiet for a long time. I told myself that discretion was the best path, that no one would believe me, that speaking out could ruin lives, reputations, even careers. But now, after everything that's happened, after Meghan's rise to global fame, the scandals, the controversies, and the whispers that have become headlines, I can no longer stay silent. It's time for the truth. It's time for the world to hear my story. You might be asking yourself, why now? Why did Markus Anderson decide to break his silence after all these years? The answer is complicated, but it starts with the same thing that ends most stories of deception: the burden of carrying a secret too heavy to bear. And the secret I've carried isn't small. It's explosive. It's the kind of truth that, once revealed, makes people question everything they think they know about Meghan Markle. You see, she wasn't just a friend. She wasn't just a colleague or a distant acquaintance. She was my mistress. And all this time, she was still married to Trevor Ingleson. Let that sink in for a moment. Imagine discovering that the person you trusted, the person you opened your heart to, the person whose smile could light up a room, was living a life parallel to yours. A life filled with lies, manipulation, and betrayal. Imagine knowing that while you were entangled in a secret affair, the world was none the wiser, and yet the consequences of those choices would ripple far beyond your personal experience. I want to be clear about one thing before we dive deeper. This isn't a story meant to shame. It isn't about vendettas or revenge. This is the truth as I lived it. And the truth is far more shocking than any rumor or headline could ever convey. You may feel disbelief, shock, anger, maybe even sympathy. All of these reactions are justified. And I want you to sit with them as we walk through this story, piece by piece. Because what I'm about to reveal is not just about Meghan Markle's behavior. It's about human nature, manipulation, and the way charm can be weaponized to hide the deepest, darkest truths. When I first met Meghan, she seemed like someone you could trust. She was warm, engaging, witty. The kind of person who lights up a room just by walking into it. Everyone around her wanted to be near her, to bask in the glow of her confidence and charisma. I was no exception. I admired her, I respected her, and over time, I found myself drawn in by a magnetic force I couldn't resist. At first, it was innocent. We shared conversations, laughs, and moments of genuine connection. But it wasn't long before the boundaries started to blur, the lines between friendship and something more began to fade. And then it happened. The moment that changed everything. A text here, a lingering glance there. A meeting that was supposed to be casual, but felt charged with something unspeakable. I didn't want to believe it at first. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself she wouldn't do that to someone while still married. But deep down, I knew the truth. And I didn't want to face it. Can you imagine what it feels like to fall for someone completely, only to realize that your feelings are tangled in deception? That the very person you admire is living a parallel life that deliberately hides the truth from everyone around her, including the person she vowed commitment to? It's a confusion that pierces every part of your being, mixing desire with guilt, admiration with suspicion, and love with betrayal. And that's exactly where I found myself. Caught in a storm I didn't see coming, powerless, yet unable to step away. You might wonder why I didn't speak out sooner. The answer is simple: fear. Fear of public scrutiny. Fear of disbelief. Fear of being labeled the villain in a story that the world had already decided she was the heroine of. Meghan Markle is a master at crafting her narrative. She presents an image of grace, intelligence, and kindness, a persona so compelling that no one would ever imagine the darker truths lurking beneath. And because of that, I stayed silent. I stayed in the shadows, hoping that somehow the truth would remain contained, a secret only known to a select few. But secrets have a way of escaping. They seep through the cracks, they whisper to the wrong ears, and eventually, they demand to be told. And as time went on, as Meghan's star continued to rise, as her behavior became more public and her choices more scrutinized, I realized that staying silent was no longer an option. The truth needed to be shared, not just for me, but for anyone who believed the story she wanted them to see. Here's something that will shock you. What I experienced was just the tip of the iceberg. The stories you've heard, the headlines you've read, the glimpses of Meghan Markle's life that the media has fed you, none of it captures the full picture. Behind closed doors, things were very different. Manipulation, control, and calculated charm were constants. Moments that appeared spontaneous were rehearsed. Gestures of kindness were carefully orchestrated. And while the world saw the fairy tale, I was living in the reality of deception. Have you ever felt trapped by your own emotions? I was there, completely ensnared, unable to reconcile my admiration for someone with the growing awareness of their manipulative behavior. It's a tension that gnaws at your soul, a cognitive dissonance that leaves you questioning not just the other person, but yourself. How could I have been so blind? How could I have allowed myself to be drawn into a story that wasn't mine to tell? And more importantly, how did someone so calculated hide behind the very traits that made her beloved by the world? And yet, despite the deception, there was a strange beauty to it, not in the acts themselves, but in the complexity of human behavior. The way someone could balance charm and deceit, warmth and cold calculation. The way someone could manipulate situations, people, and perceptions without ever leaving a trace. Observing it firsthand was like watching a masterclass in human psychology, terrifying, fascinating, and utterly mesmerizing all at once. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. A revelation so profound, so shocking, that it forced me to reconsider not just my own role in this story, but the entire narrative that had been carefully constructed around Meghan Markle. Secrets I thought were buried came to light. Hidden relationships, clandestine meetings, and choices that defied logic, all converging in a moment of truth that I can no longer keep to myself. I won't lie. Telling this story comes with consequences. People will doubt me. People will dismiss me. People will say I'm seeking attention or attempting revenge. But the fact is, the truth cannot be silenced forever. And for every person who has ever been manipulated, deceived, or betrayed by someone they trusted, this story will resonate. It's a cautionary tale, a revelation, and an exposé all rolled into one. So stay with me. Pay attention to every detail, every anecdote, every revelation. Because as we go deeper, you'll realize that what I'm revealing isn't just about an affair, a betrayal, or a scandal. It's about understanding the layers of deception, the power of influence, and the human tendency to be charmed, even when danger is staring us in the face. And by the end of this story, you'll see the full picture. You'll understand the choices, the consequences, and the reality of life behind the headlines. The truth isn't pretty. It isn't neat. It isn't simple. But it is real. And it starts here, with the story I lived, the story I can no longer hide, and the story that will finally shed light on Meghan Markle in a way no one else has dared to. And just when you think you've grasped the full picture, the first shocking revelation awaits in the next chapter. It's the kind of detail that makes you question everything you believed about loyalty, love, and the carefully curated world of celebrity. Because what I'm about to reveal next isn't just a secret. It's the key to understanding everything that followed. It all started innocently enough, or at least that's what I told myself at the time. Sometimes, life has a way of sneaking up on you, dropping you into situations that seem harmless at first, only to slowly reveal their dangerous undercurrents. When I first met Meghan Markle, I thought I was meeting a charming, ambitious woman with a magnetic personality. Little did I know that meeting her would be the start of a secret that would change the course of my life forever. The first impression she left was unforgettable. It wasn't just her smile. Although, yes, that smile could disarm even the most skeptical person. It was the way she carried herself, a mix of confidence and casual warmth that made everyone around her feel like they were the only person in the room. I remember thinking, she has this incredible energy, this aura that draws you in, and you can't help but be fascinated by her. There was an elegance to her mannerisms, an ease to her conversations, but beneath it all, I felt something more. Something guarded, something calculated, even if just a little. I didn't know it yet, but that guarded side would be the key to everything that came next. At first, our interactions were entirely professional. We met through mutual friends and social circles that intertwined with our work projects. She was witty, smart, and charming. Someone you wanted to impress, and yet feared slightly because you sensed she could see right through you. I enjoyed her company, and over time, our casual conversations became longer, more personal. We shared stories of childhoods, ambitions, and private struggles. I felt a sense of connection, one that is rare in the superficial circles she moved in. It was easy to trust her, and trusting her seemed natural. After all, she projected a sense of honesty and vulnerability that felt real, or so I thought. And then came the first hints that things weren't entirely as they seemed. Little moments, small inconsistencies that I didn't immediately recognize for what they were. Perhaps it was the way she would dodge certain personal questions, or the way her phone seemed to be an extension of herself, always buzzing with private messages she didn't want anyone to see. I remember asking myself, why is she so protective of her personal life, and dismissing it as normal, chalking it up to her being careful with her privacy. In hindsight, those were the first warning signs, subtle yet significant. We began to spend more time together. Coffee meetings, late evening chats, walks through the city. It wasn't long before boundaries started to blur. And here's the thing. When someone like Meghan Markle steps into your life, it doesn't happen overnight. It's gradual. The charm, the attention, the validation, it seeps into your consciousness, making you blind to the danger right in front of you. And that's exactly what happened to me. I was enthralled, not just by her presence, but by the way she made me feel. Seen, heard, important. She had a way of making you believe you were the center of her world, even if only temporarily. But even in those early stages, I noticed contradictions. The charming public persona didn't always match what I glimpsed in private. Sometimes, she would speak with subtle manipulation, testing reactions, gauging how much influence she had. She had a remarkable ability to shift moods, to make someone feel elated one moment and insecure the next, all under the guise of casual conversation. It was intoxicating, confusing, and, though I didn't realize it yet, deeply calculated. I remember one particular evening that still haunts me. We were at a small gathering, surrounded by mutual friends and colleagues. Meghan was radiant, laughing, captivating everyone in the room. But in a quieter moment, away from the crowd, she pulled me aside. Her expression shifted, her voice lowered, and she spoke in a way that made me feel like I had been granted access to a hidden, secret world. It was flattering, thrilling, and yet tinged with unease. That moment marked the first true recognition that what I was experiencing was unique, special, yes, but also potentially dangerous. There was a double life emerging, one that I didn't fully understand yet. I asked myself questions I couldn't answer. Was she interested in me? Did she feel the same connection I felt? Or was this just another layer of charm, another calculated interaction? These doubts gnawed at me, but the allure was too strong to resist. The pull of her attention, the intensity of her engagement, it all drew me further in. And somewhere deep down, a tiny voice whispered caution, but it was easily drowned out by fascination and desire. The beginning of the secret wasn't dramatic at first. There were no grand gestures or shocking confessions. It was in the small things, the lingering looks, the inside jokes, the way she seemed to prioritize my company over anyone else's. Slowly, imperceptibly, a pattern emerged. I was beginning to realize that Meghan Markle was not just someone to admire from afar. She was someone who had the ability to manipulate attention, to test loyalty, and to bend situations to her favor. And the more I became entangled, the clearer it became that she was a person who played the long game, carefully, deliberately. But even as I started to notice these patterns, I was not immune to the charm. It's strange how people can see the truth, yet still fall for it. How can someone who knows there's danger still step closer, still engage, still open themselves up to risk? I can only describe it as a combination of fascination and fear, mixed with the hope that the person you trust isn't as dangerous as they seem. And that hope, I soon learned, can be deadly. At this point, Meghan was still legally married to Trevor Engelson, though the details of their marriage were opaque to me. I knew of him in passing, had seen him referenced on social media, and understood that their relationship was official and public. And yet, there was a tension in the air, a sense that the narrative I was being presented with did not align with reality. She was charming, compelling, and focused on her ambitions, but there were cracks. Small contradictions in stories, vague references to her marital life, moments of discomfort that suggested hidden truths. I didn't fully grasp it at the time, but the first seeds of realization were planted. Imagine the psychological pressure of noticing these contradictions while simultaneously feeling deeply connected to someone. It's a disorienting mix of emotions, excitement, guilt, suspicion, and longing, all coexisting in a volatile, confusing space. Every interaction became layered. Every word she spoke potentially a clue, every gesture possibly a manipulation. Yet I found myself returning again and again, caught in the pull of the connection. There's a strange addiction to being close to someone who is complicated, secretive, and charismatic. It's a tension that's hard to describe unless you've lived it, but once you do, it shapes your perspective forever. And here's something I need to share. Early on, Meghan exhibited what I can only describe as instinctual social strategy. She knew how to read people, how to test their boundaries, and how to manipulate outcomes without ever appearing overtly controlling. These were small, almost invisible maneuvers at first, but they left a lasting impression. She could charm, persuade, and influence in ways that felt natural, almost effortless. It's a skill that, in the wrong hands, can be dangerous, and I was starting to feel the weight of that danger, even before I fully understood its scope. As our interactions continued, the connection intensified, and the secret began to take shape. There were moments of shared laughter that felt genuine, moments of intimate conversation that felt authentic, but always with a shadow lurking beneath. It was in the quiet, unspoken moments, the way she would avoid certain topics, the subtle deflection of questions, the careful curation of attention, that the beginnings of the affair were laid. It wasn't immediate, it wasn't explosive, but it was deliberate, calculated, and building towards something that neither of us could fully anticipate. And that, my friends, is where the story truly begins. Not with a dramatic confrontation, not with a scandalous reveal, but with the quiet, almost imperceptible moments that set the stage for everything that would follow. It's in these early interactions, these seemingly innocent exchanges, that the foundation for betrayal and manipulation was constructed. And as much as I tried to ignore it, to rationalize it, to tell myself it was harmless, the truth was already emerging, quietly, inexorably, and without mercy. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late to step back. The connection had deepened, the boundaries had blurred, and the secret had taken hold. I was no longer just an observer. I was a participant, and the realization that Meghan Markle was living a double life. Maintaining a marriage with Trevor Engelson while cultivating a secret relationship with me was both shocking and terrifying. It challenged everything I believed about loyalty, trust, and human behavior. But what came next would push the story into territory I never imagined. A series of events, decisions, and revelations that would leave me questioning not only Meghan Markle's motives, but my own judgment. And that's where the next chapter begins. Because what I'm about to reveal next isn't just the escalation of a secret relationship. It's the point where innocence ends and the reality of deception begins that I never imagined I would find myself in the middle of a situation like this. The kind of situation that feels thrilling, intoxicating, and utterly wrong all at once. And yet, here I was, pulled deeper into Meghan Markle's world than I could have ever anticipated. At first, I told myself it was harmless, that our connection was just a natural evolution of friendship. But the truth hit me hard when I realized it wasn't harmless at all. This was something far more complicated, far more dangerous. I was involved with someone who was still married. And not just married to anyone. Married to Trevor Engelson, a man who, at the time, had no idea what was happening right under his nose. The first time the lines truly blurred between friendship and something more was subtle, almost imperceptible. It wasn't an explosive moment or a bold declaration. It was a look, a lingering touch, a private joke meant only for us. I remember feeling an electric pull in that moment, a mixture of guilt, excitement, and curiosity. The kind of feeling that makes you question everything you thought you knew about boundaries and morality. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself that it was only natural to feel a connection with someone you deeply admire, but deep down, I knew that this was the start of something that would complicate both our lives irrevocably. You might be wondering, what makes someone risk so much for an affair like this? The answer, at least in Meghan's case, was charm, confidence, and a magnetic energy that's hard to resist. She had a way of making you feel like you were the only person who mattered in the world, that your presence, your attention, and your loyalty were vital to her. It's a skill, really, a dangerous skill when combined with ambition and secrecy. And I found myself falling, little by little, into the gravity of her influence. The first encounter that shifted the dynamic from casual connection to clandestine affair was unremarkable in appearance, but unforgettable in effect. We met in a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes, both of us pretending to be engaged in an ordinary conversation. But beneath the surface, there was tension, unspoken desire, and a subtle understanding that this meeting was more than just friendly. She looked at me with a focus that felt intense and intimate, as if she were studying every reaction, every micro-expression. And in that moment, I realized that what was about to happen couldn't be undone. It's strange how such affairs begin. They're rarely announced or dramatic at the start. They creep in slowly, masked by charm, necessity, or the thrill of secrecy. With Meghan, it was all three. Each interaction became a delicate dance. Subtle texts exchanged, private meetings scheduled, fleeting moments of touch or eye contact that carried meaning far beyond the words spoken. I told myself I could handle it, that I could compartmentalize this, but the reality was that I was already ensnared. The pull was too strong, the emotional investment too deep, and the temptation too irresistible. And then came the first real test of secrecy. Meghan was careful, calculated. She never left traces that could be easily followed. She avoided leaving her phone unattended, kept her schedule opaque, and always maintained plausible deniability. Yet, she wanted me close. She wanted my attention. The thrill of secrecy, the adrenaline rush of stolen moments, it was intoxicating. And I, foolishly or perhaps willingly, allowed myself to become entangled. Every meeting, every conversation, every lingering glance felt like a risk, and yet I craved it, like a moth drawn to a flame. What made it all the more complicated was knowing that Trevor Engelson was out there, unaware, trusting, and invested in his marriage. I wrestled with this reality constantly. There were nights when I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, questioning my decisions, analyzing her motives, wondering if I had become a pawn in a larger game. Was she truly interested in me, or was I just part of a calculated plan to maintain control over multiple aspects of her life? The uncertainty was maddening, but I couldn't walk away. Not yet. Not when the connection felt so real, so immediate, so intense. The affair escalated gradually. It wasn't sudden, but once it began in earnest, there was no turning back. Our private meetings became more frequent, our conversations deeper and more personal. She shared thoughts and ambitions she didn't voice publicly, insights into her worldview, and hints of vulnerabilities she only allowed certain people to see. In return, I shared pieces of myself, trusting her with confidences that I would never have shared with anyone else. That trust, that intimacy, is what makes betrayal so painful. The deeper the connection, the harder the fall when deception is revealed. One of the most striking aspects of Meghan's approach was her ability to blend charm with subtle control. She could make you feel powerful one moment and unsure of yourself the next, all while keeping the interactions seemingly innocent. It's a psychological precision that's rare and, when used manipulatively, incredibly effective. I noticed it, yes, but I underestimated its impact. I thought I was immune to manipulation, that my awareness would protect me, but in reality, I was caught in a web before I even recognized it. Humor, too, played a role. Meghan had a way of using laughter, jokes, and playful banter to defuse tension, distract from difficult questions, and maintain the illusion of innocence. There were moments when I would laugh at her jokes, smile at her stories, and feel a genuine connection, all while knowing in the back of my mind that a hidden layer existed beneath every word. That contradiction, The coexistence of genuine charm and calculated intent became a central theme of our interactions. It was intoxicating and disorienting, and it kept me coming back for more. I can't describe every private moment without sounding either sensational or trivial, but there were certain encounters that left an indelible mark. Quiet dinners where every glance and touch carried secret meaning. Late-night conversations that felt like confessions, where we shared fears, hopes, and regrets. Moments where I felt seen, truly seen, in ways that others could never imagine. And yet, there was always an undercurrent of caution, an awareness that what we were doing was wrong, that it carried consequences not just for us, but for those connected to us, particularly Trevor Engelson. And then there were the messages. Short texts, sometimes playful, sometimes urgent, sent at times when no one else could see. Little notes that confirmed our connection, that reinforced secrecy, that built intimacy in a hidden world. Looking back, the thrill of receiving those messages, of knowing we had a secret no one else could touch, was as addictive as it was dangerous. Each one was a small rebellion, a step deeper into a world of deception and desire. The affair's intensity grew, as it inevitably does. What began as subtle flirtation became undeniable passion. Each interaction was charged with emotion, tension, and anticipation. And every encounter, every word, every secret message added to a growing sense of inevitability. This was no longer casual. This was no longer a fleeting mistake. This was a relationship that existed in the shadows, unacknowledged by the world, and invisible to everyone who should have known. By this point, the moral and emotional stakes were high. I knew what we were doing was wrong. I knew the risk of exposure was enormous. I knew that Trevor Engelson, someone I respected, was completely unaware. And yet, the connection, the allure, the intoxicating mix of charm and secrecy kept me bound. It's hard to describe to anyone who hasn't been in this kind of situation, the push and pull of desire and guilt, the tension of knowing you're living a lie while also feeling alive in a way you never felt before. It's addictive, it's dangerous, and it's impossible to ignore once it takes hold. And just when I thought I could keep it contained, to maintain some semblance of control, Meghan made a move that changed everything. A subtle shift, an action so calculated, so deliberate, that it confirmed what I had begun to suspect all along. Our relationship was no longer just about connection or desire. It was about power, influence, and control. And the implications of that move would ripple far beyond our private world, touching people, reputations, and lives in ways I could never have imagined. Little did I know, the affair's true complexity was only beginning to reveal itself. Behind the charm, behind the humor, behind the intimate moments, there was a strategy unfolding, one that would impact not just Trevor Engelson, not just me, but the very perception of Meghan Markle as a public figure. And that's where the next chapter begins, where the consequences of our secret entanglement start to collide with the real world, setting the stage for revelations, betrayals, and a drama that no one saw coming. You think you know someone. You think you've seen all their sides, all their moods, all their truths. And then, one day, you walk through a door, figuratively or literally. And you realize the person you've admired, trusted, or even loved is someone entirely different behind closed doors. That was my experience with Meghan Markle. The Meghan the world adored, the Meghan that appeared charming, witty, and kind in public, was a carefully constructed persona. And behind closed doors, things were far more complicated, far more manipulative, and at times, completely shocking. The first time I truly saw this side of her, I was invited to her apartment under the guise of a casual meeting. On the surface, it seemed ordinary. Drinks, casual conversation, laughter. But there was a subtle tension in the air, a charged energy that was different from anything I had experienced before with her. The way she moved, the way she spoke, the little flickers of emotion behind her eyes, they all hinted at a hidden reality. I remember sitting there, watching her navigate the room with precision, realizing that every gesture, every word, was deliberate. It wasn't just charm, it was strategy. I want you to understand what I'm saying here. This wasn't a matter of mood swings or quirks. This was intentional behavior, practiced, measured, and perfectly timed. She could shift from warmth to coldness in a heartbeat. and each transition carried a subtle message. One that most people would never notice, but someone who spent enough time with her could begin to detect. And I had started to detect. At first, it was confusing. Then, it became alarming. One of the earliest signs was how she controlled the narrative in the room. Even in casual conversation, she had a way of subtly dominating the discussion, guiding the topics, and steering attention toward herself or away from subjects she didn't want to discuss. It wasn't overt. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. But over time, I noticed a pattern. She had an uncanny ability to manipulate perception, not just mine, but anyone who interacted with her privately. This wasn't someone who acted impulsively. This was someone who calculated each interaction carefully. The emotional impact of witnessing this was profound. Imagine being captivated by someone, trusting them, feeling connected to them, and slowly realizing that their every action is measured, their every smile engineered, and their every moment of intimacy carefully crafted to elicit a response. It's disorienting. It's both fascinating and terrifying. And it's something that leaves a permanent mark on your perception of trust, relationships, and human behavior. There were moments that seemed perfectly innocent but were loaded with subtext. A gentle touch on the arm, a lingering gaze, a whispered comment, small gestures that seemed affectionate or playful, but in reality, were tools of subtle manipulation. I didn't fully recognize their significance at first, but over time, the pattern became undeniable. Behind closed doors, Meghan was a master of controlling the environment, of influencing reactions, and of ensuring that she maintained power in every interaction. And yet, there was vulnerability too. Moments where she would confide in me, sharing fears or insecurities that seemed genuine. It created a confusing duality, charm and control on one hand, apparent vulnerability on the other. That duality is what makes someone so captivating and so dangerous at the same time. You want to trust them, to believe in the genuine moments, but the calculated behaviors are always there, lurking beneath the surface, creating tension, uncertainty, and ultimately, entanglement. Some of the most striking examples of her behavior behind closed doors involved her interactions with other people. She had a way of subtly undermining those around her without it appearing obvious. Compliments were calculated, criticisms were cloaked in jest, and disagreements were framed as concern or advice. It was a delicate balancing act, and she executed it flawlessly. I watched, often amazed, as she navigated conversations with precision that seemed effortless. And I realized that this skill wasn't just for personal interactions. It was a survival mechanism, a way to maintain control and influence in a world that constantly scrutinized her every move. One particular evening stands out vividly. We were at a private gathering, just a few friends, and a casual topic came up: someone's career, their ambitions, and personal decisions. Meghan intervened subtly, offering advice framed as concern, but with an undertone that made the listeners second-guess themselves. The person responded positively outwardly, but I could see the subtle tension building underneath. Later, she laughed it off as playful banter, but I knew exactly what had happened: a masterful display of social influence and subtle control. And in that moment, I understood that this wasn't a one-time event. It was a pattern, and it was deliberate. The emotional toll of being part of this dynamic was significant. I found myself constantly analyzing her words, her gestures, and her moods. Every interaction carried hidden meaning, and I had to stay alert to avoid being manipulated. Yet, paradoxically, I was drawn to it. The thrill of being involved with someone so captivating, the adrenaline of secrecy, the intoxication of being part of a world that few could access. It was addictive. And that addiction is what kept the affair alive, even as I recognized the danger. I began to notice small contradictions too. Publicly, she would present one image: warm, engaging, gracious, while privately, her behavior was often more calculated, sometimes harsh, sometimes manipulative. It wasn't constant, but the inconsistencies were enough to plant seeds of doubt, tension, and anxiety. And yet, the moments of genuine connection were so compelling that they made the contradictions almost bearable. It's a psychological tension that's hard to describe unless you've lived it, the simultaneous awareness of deception and desire. The control extended beyond behavior to planning and secrecy. She would schedule meetings, manage her time, and coordinate interactions in ways that ensured privacy and discretion. Messages were crafted carefully, locations were chosen strategically, and interactions were orchestrated to minimize risk. Every detail mattered. Every decision was calculated. And being part of that world meant navigating an intricate web of rules, behaviors, and hidden dynamics that most people could never even imagine. But it wasn't just about strategy. There was emotion too, or at least the appearance of it. Moments of warmth, moments of laughter, moments of vulnerability. They were real enough to make the connection feel authentic, and that authenticity made the manipulation even more effective. When someone blends charm, strategy, and vulnerability, it creates a powerful psychological dynamic. Trust intertwined with doubt, desire intertwined with fear, connection intertwined with control. And I was living in the center of it. At the same time, there was a constant awareness of the consequences. Trevor Engelson existed in the background, a reminder of boundaries that should never have been crossed. Each encounter carried the weight of secrecy, the risk of exposure, and the knowledge that the choices we were making could have lasting impacts on more than just ourselves. It's one thing to navigate a relationship in private. It's another to do so while someone else is unknowingly invested, trusting, and vulnerable. That tension between desire and morality, between thrill and consequence, defined every moment behind closed doors. I also began to see how calculated her public persona was in relation to her private behavior. Small gestures, carefully curated appearances, interactions with friends and colleagues. All were designed to maintain a consistent narrative that masked the truth of her personal relationships. It was a lesson in perception management, in how someone can influence not just private interactions, but public perception simultaneously. Observing it was like watching a highly skilled strategist at work, and I couldn't help but be simultaneously impressed and alarmed. And through it all, the intimacy between us grew. Private conversations, quiet meetings, shared experiences, they intensified the bond, even as I understood the dangerous reality we were navigating. Every word mattered. Every gesture mattered. And the deeper we went, the more complicated the emotional landscape became. It wasn't just about desire anymore. It was about trust, power, and understanding the duality of someone whose charm and calculation coexisted so seamlessly. But here's the thing. No matter how skilled someone is at manipulation, secrets eventually surface. And while the private world behind those closed doors remained hidden for a time, cracks began to appear. Moments of oversight, slips of the tongue, and unforeseen interactions created tension that could not be ignored. And as I watched these cracks emerge, I realized that the delicate balance we had maintained between desire, secrecy, and deception was about to collapse. What happened next would mark a turning point. Behind closed doors, Megan's true complexity was fully revealed. A combination of charm, strategy, manipulation, and calculated behavior that no one outside our secret world could have imagined. And the events that followed set the stage for the escalation of the affair, the exposure of hidden truths, and the eventual reckoning that neither of us could avoid. You think you know someone. You trust them. You believe in the vows they made, the promises they whispered, the smiles they gave. And then, in a cruel twist of reality, you realize how little you actually knew. That was Trevor Engelson's blind spot, the truth that he never saw coming, the betrayal that was happening right under his nose, while he was completely unaware. And the deeper I got involved with Meghan Markle, the more painfully obvious it became. He had no idea what was really going on. I remember the first time I thought about him seriously in this context. At the time, it was abstract, almost unreal. Meghan's charm, her energy, her magnetic personality, they had a pull that was hard to resist, and the concept of her being married to Trevor seemed distant, almost irrelevant in my mind. But in reality, it was central. Every interaction I had with her carried the weight of his existence, his trust, and the promises they had made to each other. Ignoring that fact was impossible, yet we did it anyway, and that's where the dangerous dance began. Trevor, from what I knew and observed, was earnest, dedicated, and genuinely invested in his marriage. He loved Meghan in a way that made him vulnerable to deception, completely blind to the subtleties of her behavior. He trusted her implicitly, believing the persona she presented to the world. And that trust, that faith in her character, was exploited, not maliciously at first, perhaps, but calculated in a way that ensured the secrecy of our interactions. I saw the contrast vividly. His open, honest nature versus her ability to conceal and manipulate. The imbalance was stark, and it created a tension that would eventually explode in ways none of us could have predicted. One of the most shocking things about Trevor's blind spot was how normal everything appeared on the surface. Publicly, Meghan played the perfect wife, attentive, charming, and graceful. She posted carefully curated images, appeared supportive, and maintained an aura of innocence. Friends and colleagues, including Trevor, saw only the surface. They saw warmth, loyalty, and affection. No one suspected that behind the scenes, a complex network of private interactions, secret meetings, and hidden emotional entanglements was unfolding. And yet, that is exactly what was happening. There were moments when I couldn't help but reflect on the mechanics of deception. How can someone hide such significant truths from the person closest to them? How do you maintain a facade so convincing that even the most observant partner is left oblivious? The answer lies in strategy, charm, and meticulous attention to detail, all traits Meghan possessed in abundance. She could navigate interactions, deflect suspicions, and project an image so compelling that anyone who wasn't directly involved would believe it without question. And Trevor, unaware of the hidden dynamics, became an unwitting participant in her carefully orchestrated narrative. I remember conversations where she would subtly redirect attention or manage impressions without raising alarms. A compliment here, a joke there, a reassuring smile in the middle of a conversation. These tiny maneuvers were powerful. They reinforced the illusion of innocence and fidelity, while at the same time, keeping the secret of our growing connection intact. Observing this, I couldn't help but be both impressed and unsettled. The level of skill required to maintain that balance is extraordinary, but it's also morally ambiguous, to say the least. Trevor's blind spot wasn't just about ignorance. It was about vulnerability. He was emotionally invested, believing in the sincerity of her words, the truth of her gestures, and the integrity of their marriage. That emotional investment created a kind of tunnel vision, making it nearly impossible for him to detect subtle inconsistencies or hidden agendas. And as someone on the outside, watching the affair unfold, I could see how precarious his position was. The deeper I became involved, the more I realized that the consequences of exposure would be catastrophic for everyone involved, emotionally, socially, and personally. There were evenings I spent reflecting on the irony of it all. Here was Trevor, a man who loved Meghan genuinely and trusted her implicitly, while I, someone who knew the truth about the hidden side of their relationship, became an active participant in the deception. The psychological tension was extraordinary. On one hand, there was admiration for his integrity and devotion. On the other, there was guilt, shame, and a creeping realization of the magnitude of what we were doing. The duality of admiration and complicity is a strange, heavy burden, one that leaves lasting marks on your conscience. And yet, despite knowing the truth, we continued. The secrecy became part of the thrill. Every interaction, every message, every hidden meeting carried the weight of risk and desire. It was intoxicating, but also morally complicated. We were playing a game with high stakes, one that could unravel at any moment. And the more we played, the more I understood Trevor's blind spot. It wasn't ignorance alone. It was a combination of trust, emotional investment, and the carefully constructed illusion of normalcy that made detection nearly impossible. Trevor's life, his perspective, was being shaped by appearances. Public perception, curated interactions, and social cues created a narrative that made the secret seem impossible. This is a lesson in human behavior. When someone is emotionally invested, when they see only the surface, they can be completely blind to the hidden layers beneath. And Meghan, whether intentionally or instinctively, knew exactly how to navigate this psychological terrain. She could maintain charm, foster loyalty, and project innocence, all while concealing a complex network of private interactions that were invisible to him. It's easy to say, in retrospect, that Trevor should have known, that someone as observant as him could have detected inconsistencies. But the reality is far more nuanced. Secrets, when skillfully maintained, are nearly impossible to detect. Small deviations are dismissed, subtle cues are rationalized, and the brain fills in gaps with assumptions that align with the trusted narrative. That's exactly what happened in this case. Trevor's blind spot wasn't negligence. It was a natural consequence of trust, love, and the powerful allure of a carefully curated persona. And then came moments that tested the limits of that blind spot. Small incidents, almost imperceptible, that could have raised suspicion if interpreted differently. A vague reference here, a diverted glance there, a fleeting text that was misread or overlooked. These tiny fissures held the potential to unravel the facade. But the brilliance of the deception was in its subtlety. Nothing was blatant, nothing was overt, nothing could be pinned as definitive evidence. And as a result, Trevor remained unaware, his perception perfectly aligned with the narrative Meghan presented. Being part of this dynamic was both exhilarating and nerve-wracking. The knowledge of what was really happening, the secret I carried, created a tension that was constant, inescapable, and consuming. Every encounter with Meghan was layered with meaning. Every smile, every touch, every conversation carried weight. And every time I imagined Trevor's perspective, his blind trust, I was reminded of the magnitude of our secrecy and the delicate balance we were maintaining. I often asked myself questions I couldn't answer. How far could this go before he noticed? How much longer could the illusion hold? Was it even ethical to continue knowing what I knew? These questions haunted me, not at my conscience, and yet, the connection with Meghan made them almost irrelevant. Desire, fascination, and the pull of intimacy kept me engaged, even as I understood the moral complexity of our situation. And just when it seemed the balance might tip, when I feared exposure or confrontation, Meghan demonstrated the mastery of her craft again. Subtle, calculated, and flawlessly executed, she ensured that the equilibrium was maintained. Trevor remained oblivious. Our interactions stayed secret, and the affair continued, intensifying in both passion and complexity. But the tension was growing, the risk increasing, and the blind spot that Trevor unknowingly maintained was on the brink of collapse. What happened next would set the stage for escalation, conflict, and revelations that none of us could have anticipated. Trevor's blind spot, the very element that allowed the affair to flourish undetected, would soon collide with consequences that tested loyalty, morality, and the very foundations of trust. And that's where the next chapter begins. The first real warning signs that the delicate equilibrium could not hold forever, and the consequences of hidden truths were about to emerge in dramatic fashion. Sometimes, the first warning signs come as whispers, subtle, almost imperceptible, like the soft tremor of glass before it shatters. And sometimes, they hit you like a hammer, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. With Meghan Markle, the signs began quietly, almost teasingly, but as I look back, I realize now they were impossible to miss. If only I had been willing to truly see them. I remember the first one vividly. We were at a small gathering with friends, and she seemed unusually tense. It wasn't the kind of tension that you notice immediately, no dramatic arguments, no raised voices, just a slight rigidity in her movements, a brief pause when her phone buzzed, and a subtle glimmer of calculation in her eyes. She laughed at jokes she hadn't heard, nodded at comments she didn't respond to, and shifted attention in a way that made me pause. In that moment, I felt it, the first flicker of doubt, the first question rising in my mind about what she was hiding. But I told myself I was imagining it. I wanted to believe the charm, the warmth, the connection, anything but suspicion. The warning signs didn't stop there. Small inconsistencies in stories, vague references to meetings or obligations, and sudden disappearances became more frequent. She would cancel plans last minute with a plausible excuse, only to reappear later with a casual story that didn't quite add up. I noticed, but I ignored it. It's human nature, isn't it? We see what we want to see, interpret behavior in the light we prefer, and sometimes we refuse to acknowledge uncomfortable truths. And yet, the truth was there, creeping, subtle, undeniable if examined closely. I remember the moment I first connected these seemingly small incidents into a pattern. We were having dinner at a quiet restaurant. a setting that felt intimate and safe, and her phone buzzed. The text was brief, disappearing before I could see it. But the way she reacted, a split-second hesitation, a careful glance around the room, the rapid swipe to hide the screen, told me something. My stomach sank. I didn't want to know the truth, but my instincts screamed at me that something was off. That was the first unmistakable warning sign: secrecy. And secrecy, I realized, is the seed of every hidden truth. Have you ever felt that moment, when your instincts tell you something is wrong, but your heart refuses to accept it? That's exactly what I felt. The warning signs were there, subtle yet persistent, but I chose to rationalize them, to dismiss them as coincidences or misunderstandings. After all, Meghan's charm was disarming. Her intelligence, her wit, and her ability to navigate social interactions made it easy to overlook the contradictions, to focus instead on the connection we shared. But ignoring the signs didn't make them go away. It only delayed the inevitable reckoning. Then came the second, more glaring warning sign. A casual comment, dropped as if by accident, that hinted at knowledge of things she shouldn't have known, or perhaps knowledge that she didn't want to reveal. It was small, almost innocuous, but to me, it was a glaring red flag. My mind raced. How did she know that? Was she lying about where she had been? Was she testing me, gauging my reaction? These are the moments that start to twist your perception of reality. The moments that make you question everything you thought you knew about someone you trust. The pattern became increasingly difficult to ignore. Phone calls that ended abruptly, sudden changes in schedule, hints of interactions with people she never mentioned, all signals that something hidden was unfolding. I began to feel the emotional tension rise with every encounter. Anxiety, desire, doubt, and intrigue mingled in a way that was disorienting and exhausting. And yet, there was still the allure, the intoxicating charm, the warmth and connection that made leaving or confronting the situation feel impossible. That's the paradox of dealing with someone like Meghan. The very traits that make her captivating also obscure the danger, masking manipulation in layers of charisma and emotional intelligence. I remember thinking often, is this really happening? Am I overreacting? And each time, the signs would escalate, growing bolder, more blatant, yet still subtle enough to be dismissed by anyone else. One evening, she received a call and stepped into the other room to talk privately. The tone of her voice shifted, a tension I hadn't heard before, a hint of something I couldn't name. I wanted to confront her, to demand an explanation, but fear and desire held me back. I couldn't stop watching, though. I couldn't stop noticing the little things that didn't add up. And then came the first unmistakable, undeniable sign. A secret interaction that confirmed what I had been subconsciously fearing. I can't reveal every detail, not yet, but suffice it to say that what I witnessed shattered the thin veil of innocence that had kept me calm. It was a moment that crystallized all the whispers, all the inconsistencies, all the uneasy feelings I had been suppressing. And in that instant, I realized. The secret we were part of wasn't just a casual misstep. It was something far more deliberate, far more significant, and far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. It's an unsettling experience to be privy to someone's true behavior while everyone else sees only the curated image. Publicly, Meghan was flawless, poised, gracious, intelligent, and composed. Privately, she was calculating, strategic, and unapologetically manipulative. The contradictions were stark, the contrast undeniable, and the warning signs, which had started subtly, were now glaring. Every action, every word, every glance carried dual meanings, some innocent, some loaded, some carefully constructed to maintain control and secrecy. Have you ever been in a situation where every instinct in your body tells you to act, but every fiber of your emotional being tells you to wait, to observe, to hope? That was my reality. Each warning sign brought me closer to understanding the truth, but also deeper into emotional entanglement. Desire, curiosity, fear, and moral awareness collided in ways that were both intoxicating and terrifying. It's a psychological tension that few can fully grasp, one that twists your perception of reality and tests your moral compass like nothing else. And yet, amidst these warning signs, there were moments of seeming innocence, moments that lulled me into complacency. A joke, a shared laugh, a display of vulnerability, all carefully timed, all carefully executed, all designed to maintain the delicate equilibrium of secrecy and desire. It's that duality that makes the story so complex. The simultaneous experience of trust and doubt, attraction and suspicion, intimacy and manipulation. It's emotionally exhausting, psychologically complex, and utterly compelling. The first warning signs were only the beginning. They were the subtle tremors that foreshadowed an earthquake. Each new revelation, each new inconsistency, each new private moment added to a growing tension, a crescendo of secrecy and risk. And as I watched it unfold, I understood the stakes. This wasn't just about desire, attraction, or companionship. This was about trust, morality, and the precarious balance of hidden truths. The closer we got, the more dangerous it became for all of us. And just when I thought I had fully understood the depth of the situation, a new warning sign emerged. One so shocking, so undeniable, that it forced me to confront the reality we had been avoiding. It wasn't just small inconsistencies anymore. It wasn't subtle hints or fleeting moments. It was a tangible, undeniable signal that the secret world we were creating could no longer be contained. And in that moment, I knew the stakes had changed forever. What happened next set the stage for escalation. The first warnings became catalysts, pushing events into motion, revealing layers of deception, manipulation, and hidden intentions that none of us could have anticipated. And that's where the next chapter begins. The chapter where the contrast between public perception and private reality becomes undeniable, and the hidden truths can no longer remain in the shadows. Everyone thinks they know Meghan Markle. The charming, polished, radiant woman who graces headlines, attends red carpets, and wins hearts worldwide. But the Meghan the world sees is only one side of a complex, carefully curated coin. Behind that radiant smile, behind the social media posts, behind the polished public persona, there exists a private reality few have ever glimpsed, a reality I lived firsthand. And it's a side that changes everything you thought you knew about her. I first began noticing the contrast early on, during moments when she let her guard down, even slightly. Publicly, Meghan had mastered the art of projection, charisma, confidence, and warmth seamlessly blended into the perfect public image. She smiled, laughed, and interacted in ways that seemed natural, effortless, and utterly authentic. People were drawn to her magnetism, not realizing that what they were seeing was only a fraction of the truth. The persona she showed the world was a tool, a carefully constructed narrative, and those of us who spent time with her privately could see the layers beneath. The private Meghan was more complicated, layered, and, at times, unpredictable. Her moods could shift in an instant, her tone could change without warning, and her words often carried hidden meanings. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but as I spent more time with her, patterns emerged. This wasn't random behavior. It was deliberate, strategic, and deeply insightful. She knew exactly what to show the world, what to conceal, and how to manipulate perception without leaving a trace. And that is what made her so captivating and so dangerous. One evening, I watched this duality unfold in a way that still haunts me. We were attending a private gathering, friends mingling, casual laughter filling the room. Publicly, she was radiant, gracious, and charming, the perfect host, engaging everyone effortlessly. But behind closed doors, in quiet moments, I noticed how she subtly shifted the energy of the room. A glance here, a comment there, a whispered word to someone. Small actions that carried enormous influence. It was a dance, a balancing act, a performance that few would ever detect. And I realized in that moment that the Meghan people adored publicly and the Meghan I knew privately were two entirely different entities. The implications of this duality were staggering. Public perception is powerful. It shapes opinion, dictates social behavior, and creates assumptions that are rarely questioned. Meghan leveraged this power expertly, maintaining an image of grace, warmth, and honesty, while privately navigating interactions with precision and intent. And the irony was that those of us closest to her were caught in the tension between these worlds, drawn to her warmth while simultaneously aware of her strategic manipulation. I began to see this contrast in more personal ways as well. In public, she appeared approachable, empathetic, and supportive. Privately, she could be sharp, critical, and calculating. Compliments were sometimes laced with subtle control, guidance sometimes with hidden manipulation, and affection often blended seamlessly with emotional leverage. It was a psychological complexity that few could navigate without becoming entangled, and I soon found myself deeply enmeshed in it. One incident stands out vividly. We were at a casual dinner with mutual acquaintances. In public, Meghan laughed, engaged, and charmed everyone effortlessly, her presence lighting up the room. But in private moments, when she thought no one else was paying attention, she subtly tested boundaries, mine, theirs, and even the unspoken limits of social interaction. Her words, her gestures, and her expressions carried multiple layers of meaning, and understanding them required constant attention and interpretation. For those unaware, it was invisible. For those close to her, it was a masterclass in subtle influence. I started noticing patterns in how she presented herself publicly versus privately. The public Meghan was carefully curated, polished, and seemingly flawless. Every smile, every comment, every interaction was measured for impact and perception. The private Meghan, by contrast, was strategic, controlling, and attuned to subtle power dynamics. She understood human behavior intimately, how to charm, manipulate, and maintain influence without overtly revealing her intent. Witnessing this duality firsthand was both fascinating and alarming, an emotional roller coaster that left me constantly questioning what was real and what was performance. The emotional consequences of this contrast were profound. On one hand, I was drawn to her intelligence, her charm, and her complexity. On the other hand, I was constantly aware of the manipulations, the subtle tests, and the hidden agendas. Desire, admiration, and curiosity intertwined with fear, doubt, and moral uncertainty.